don't forget to go through the life lesson that goes with it. And for those who can't make a Sunday, don't forget that there's a podcast of that sermon that goes along with this message video and life lesson. Today, we're continuing on in our series through the book of Hebrews chapter by chapter, and we're covering chapter 7. And in this chapter, our author, whoever he is, once again mentions Melchizedek. And he's been mentioning Melchizedek a lot, specifically comparing him to Christ. But in this chapter, he mentions that Melchizedek, in comparison to Abraham, well, he's even greater than Abraham. And of course, if you know anything about Abraham, he's the father of all of the Hebrew people, so he was naturally considered to be great. So here's what our author said about Melchizedek and Abraham. Hebrews 7, 1 through 3. This Melchizedek was king of the city of Salem and also a priest of God Most High. When Abraham was returning home after winning a great battle against the kings, Melchizedek met him and blessed him. Then Abraham took a tenth of all he captured in battle and gave it to Melchizedek. The name Melchizedek means king of justice, and king of Salem means king of peace. There is no record of his father or mother or any of his ancestors, no beginning or end to his life. He remains a priest forever, resembling the Son of God. Out of seemingly nowhere, Melchizedek arrives, and he has a blessing for Abraham of bread and wine, and he helps him through clarification to understand that it was God that won that victory for you. And then out of gratitude, Abraham decides to give a tenth of all of the plunder to Melchizedek. Now, for the Hebrews, Abraham's tithe was incredibly important because it represented the quintessential attitude and corresponding action that God wants from his people: gratitude and generosity. But again, a part of the reason why Abraham gave this tenth is because he recognized the significance of who Melchizedek was or is. But in spite of this significance of who Melchizedek is, only the author of the book of Hebrews mentions Jesus' connection to him and ultimately states that through two very beautiful ways that I think a lot of people are aware of, and that he's the king of justice and the king of peace, or that Melchizedek and Jesus both are known to be rulers of those two very specific things. For instance, look at what the Psalms prophetically state about the Messiah or Jesus, and look at what Isaiah prophetically stated about the Messiah or Jesus. Psalm 99, 1 through 5. The Lord is king, let the nations tremble. He sits on his throne between the cherubim. Let the whole earth quake. The Lord sits in majesty in Jerusalem, exalted above all the nations. Let them praise your great and awesome name. Your name is holy, mighty King, lover of justice. You have established fairness. You have acted with justice and righteousness throughout Israel. Exalt the Lord our God. Bow low before his feet, for he is holy. Isaiah 9:6. For a child is born to us, a son is given to us. The government will rest on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Again, when Abraham realized that he had been blessed by God Most High, he decided to give a tenth or a tithe of that to the priest who represented God Most High as an offering, because he considered it the right thing to do. He considered it to be just. He considered it to be fair. And this, all for the king of justice and the king of peace, seemed like the appropriate thing to do. And so, as Christians, in response to God's blessing in our lives, to show our gratitude and reverence to him, we should consider what's right, or what's just, or what's fair according to God when it comes to anything to do with finances. For instance, I recently heard a story from a friend who shared with me something about what God needed them to do when it came to finances. A deal was made on a motorhome, and the deal was that if the motorhome sold for a specific amount above a particular amount agreed upon, that extra, that profit, would be shared. And indeed, that motorhome was sold for a profit, and therefore it needed to be shared. However, it wasn't shared immediately. And therefore, there was a little bit of guilt. There was a little bit of conviction. And the reason why is because this individual knew it was the right thing to do. It was something that was fair. It was something that was just. It was something that was agreed upon. And so, after guilt and conviction, they finally decided this has to be done. The check was written, the check was sent. And then amazingly, God began to bless and God began to provide even more, because this was not just a demonstration of trust, this was a demonstration of discipline, recognizing this is the right thing to do, even if times are tight, even if things were hard. This is a lesson for a lot of us to learn. And I know many people have stories like that. And personally, for the Hebrew people, when it came to tithing, giving a tenth of everything that they believed that God had given to them, they thought and felt like that was the right thing to do, at least for a while. And that was something that all of the Hebrew people knew about. And so when our author was writing to them, he understood that they knew all of those things and how significant Melchizedek was and how this gift to him by Abraham, that's the genesis. It's the start of that whole thing. They all knew how significant a tithe to a priest offered to God was. And so our author felt comfortable about writing this next. Hebrews 7, 4 through 14. Consider then how great this Melchizedek was. Even Abraham, the great patriarch of Israel, recognized this by giving him a tenth of what he had taken in battle. Now the law of Moses required that the priests who are descendants of Levi must collect a tithe from the rest of the people of Israel, who are also descendants of Abraham. But Melchizedek, who was not a descendant of Levi, collected a tenth from Abraham. And Melchizedek placed a blessing upon Abraham, the one who had already received the promises of God. And without question, the person who has the power to give a blessing is greater than the one who is blessed. The priests who collect tithes are men who die. So Melchizedek is greater than they are because we are told that he lives on. In addition, we might even say that these Levites, the ones who collect the tithe, paid a tithe to Melchizedek when their ancestor Abraham paid a tithe to him. For although Levi wasn't born yet, the seed from which he came was in Abraham's body when Melchizedek collected the tithe from him. So if the priesthood of Levi, on which the law was based, could have achieved the perfection God intended, why did God need to establish a different priesthood with a priest in the order of Melchizedek instead of the order of Levi and Aaron? And if the priesthood is changed, the law must also be changed to permit it. For the priest we are talking about belongs to a different tribe, whose members have never served at the altar as priests. What I mean is our Lord came from the tribe of Judah, and Moses never mentioned priest coming from that tribe. The Hebrew people, but specifically the tribe of Levi, they were going through some serious changes. So many changes as a result of Jesus. The law, the covenant, the priesthood, all of these things were changing. And ultimately, he was wanting these people to consider this, to think carefully about it, to constantly be saturating themselves with the ideas of Jesus' teaching so that they wouldn't drift from it. This has been his theme all the way throughout this entire book or letter. And ultimately, what he's doing is trying to provide evidences or proofs to these guys that this Jesus, this is the reason why we should accept these changes. These are the reasons why we should embrace all of this new that's coming that he is giving to us. For instance, look at what it is that he writes next. Hebrews 7:15 through 22. This change has been made very clear since a different priest who is like Melchizedek has appeared. Jesus became a priest not by meeting the physical requirement of belonging to the tribe of Levi, but by the power of a life that cannot be destroyed. And the psalmist pointed this out when he prophesied, "You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." Yes, the old requirement about the priesthood was set aside because it was weak and useless. For the law never made anything perfect. But now we have confidence in a better hope, through which we draw near to God. This new system was established with a solemn oath. Aaron's descendants became priests without such an oath. But there was an oath regarding Jesus, for God said to him, "The Lord has taken an oath and will not break his vow. You are a priest forever." Because of this oath, Jesus is the one who guarantees this better covenant with God. Now, for those who don't know what a theophany is, it just means an appearance of God in human form, particularly in the Old Testament. And so a lot of people wonder, well, is Melchizedek a theophany? Is he an appearance of God in the Old Testament? And here's the reason why. The writer of the Hebrews clearly stated that if someone's going to give a blessing to somebody, then the person giving a blessing is greater than the person that they are blessing. And clearly, Melchizedek gave a blessing to God. And so we don't know, but we do know this, is that the author of the book of Hebrews noticed that Melchizedek was an incredibly significant individual and points that out other than anybody else, and points out that Jesus is greater than him and Melchizedek is greater than the Levitical priesthood. And then he scrutinizes the Levitical priesthood from a very specific way or perspective, which again serves as now further evidence that our author is more than likely a Levite. Somebody like maybe Barnabas. Why? Because it's so much easier for the Hebrew people to hear from somebody who's a Levite, not from the tribe of Judah, that, oh, guess what? By the way, the Levites are now out of a job, particularly. They're no longer really necessary. That order's gone. Bye-bye. And all of that kind of stuff now, that's difficult if you're a Levite to swallow unless the person telling you is a Levite. And for a Hebrew people, this makes a lot more sense. And no doubt, because of the level of scrutinization of the Levitical priesthood and everything to do with the priesthood, clearly our author knows a lot about the priesthood. Therefore, again, more evidence that this is probably a Levite. This is probably Barnabas. And speaking of scrutinization, look what our author goes on to write next. Hebrews 7:23 through 28. There were many priests under the old system, for death prevented them from remaining in office. But because Jesus lives forever, his priesthood lasts forever. Therefore, he is able, once and forever, to save those who come to God through him. He lives forever to intercede with God on their behalf. He is the kind of high priest we need because he is holy and blameless, unstained by sin. He has been set apart from sinners and has been given the highest place of honor in heaven. Unlike those other high priests, he does not need to offer sacrifices every day. They did this for their own sins first and then for the sins of the people. But Jesus did this once for all when he offered himself as the sacrifice for the people's sins. The law appointed high priests who were limited by human weakness. But after the law was given, God appointed his son with an oath, and his son has been made the perfect high priest forever. Jesus is our perfect high priest, and as the author of Hebrews states, he is currently serving in heaven in that role. He has replaced all of the other high priests, the Levitical ones who have been limited by sin and weakness, constantly limited by their own inability to be able to stay true to what it is that God has asked, and then do so on behalf of the people. This has been an ongoing problem for the Hebrew people. They knew this. They knew this intimately. And so when the author of Hebrews is saying, here's Jesus compared to all the other Levitical high priests, he's perfect. They could see this very easily. That's actually what I'm going to be talking about more on Sunday, how perfect Jesus is as a high priest compared to these other guys. And I hope that you can join us.